We begin our show with the ongoing financial turmoil brought on by President Trump's trade tariffs. Overnight, the global market rout intensified. Asian stocks closed deep in the red. In Europe, markets are currently plunging. Well, here in America, Wall Street is bracing for another potentially bad day, with U.S. stock futures pointing to another big sell-off. On Sunday, the president again defended his tariffs and downplayed the market moves, saying, quote, "Sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something." It's a sentiment that was echoed by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who appeared on Meet the Press with NBC's Kristen Welker yesterday. Here's more from Kristen.
This week on Meet the Press, I spoke to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent about President Trump's tariffs, which triggered the worst stock market week in 5 years. As I just laid out at the top of the program, the markets lost more than $6 trillion in value. Was this disruption always part of the plan, Mr. Secretary?
Look, markets are organic, animals, and you never know what the reaction's going to be. One thing that I can tell you as the Treasury Secretary, what I've been very impressed with is the market infrastructure, that we had record volume on Friday, and everything is working very smoothly, so the American people, they can be very take great comfort in that. And in terms of the market reaction, look, we get these short-term market reactions from time to time. The market consistently underestimates Donald Trump. I remember that in 2016, the night President Trump won, the market crashed. And it turned out he was going to be the most pro-business president in over a century, maybe in the history of the country. And we went on to very high after inflation returns for the next 4 years.
You can see my full interview and a lot more at meetthepress.com. You can also get more Meet the Press here on NBC News Now every weekday at 4 p.m.
Kristen, thank you. NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung joins us now for more on all this. So obviously another bad day for global markets. What is Wall Street bracing for, not just today, but really this week?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we saw it in the Asian markets. It's happening in the European markets now. But that sell-off that really capped the end of last week, it looks like it's going to start its extension this Monday. So you look at the Hang Seng Index down 13%. Japanese markets down 7 to 8%. Europe markets down 3 to 4%. I mean, it is just looking deeply red, which points to another deeply red day in the United States as well. And Joe, I think what's so interesting about all of this is that there weren't really any more developments over the weekend. It's not like a number of other countries announced any sort of big retaliatory measures, but I think that there's just a lot of fear going into this week, because what happens on Wednesday, that's the day that the reciprocal tariffs, the so-called reciprocal tariffs rather, are set to take effect. It's after that day, basically, where it becomes fair game, a live ball, if you will, for other countries to then slap on their own retaliatory tariffs. That's actually the day that the Chinese retaliatory tariffs, which were announced last week, would take effect, another 34% on top of U.S. goods that are now going to China. It's going to be a very, very busy week as far as the news headlines go, and I think that's what Wall Street and investors are worried about.
So we know over the past week, banks, economists have really upped the risk that we're going to have a recession. The odds seem much higher. We did hear from the Federal Reserve Chair late last week. How's the Fed viewing all of this?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, when the tariff talk was happening prior to the actual announcements, right? I mean, the president had been talking about these potential tariffs well before he was even elected. He was saying it on the campaign trail. People were saying, well, it might be a temporary inflation spike as we see prices go up, as the people that have to pay these tariffs pass it on to consumers. But the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, suggested for the first time that there could be a risk of it staying even longer term. Take a listen.
It is now becoming clear that tariff increases will be significantly larger than expected. And the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth. While tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation, it's also possible that the effects could be more persistent.
More persistent. And the reason why we listen to the Fed chair is because he's essentially the steward of the U.S. economy. He's the one that steers interest rates to try to get us clear of a recession. He's not using the R word, but you do have these questions over the likes of, Jamie Dimon over at J.P. Morgan. He just had a letter out this morning saying that tariffs will likely boost inflation, slowing an already weakening U.S. economy. And his own economics team has projected that a recession is likely in 2025.
Folks are, of course, looking for an off-ramp. If the president did just suddenly pull the plug on all of these tariffs, is the theory that Wall Street would just sort of rebound and things might get back to where they were before? Or don't we know?
Well, I mean, in theory, yes. But I think the bigger question is whether or not President Trump would want to do that. I mean, obviously, the White House team is much more dialed into the politics of that, but I think that it should be no surprise to anyone that we have heard members of his administration go on the Sunday shows yesterday and basically say these are going to be here to stay. I mean, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, was speaking at CBS Face the Nation and said that these tariffs are likely to be around for weeks. So I think that even if there is a negotiating tactic here, I mean, we got some mixed messages on whether or not it is for negotiation. It sounds like, according to the administration, over 50 countries have phoned the White House asking them to lower tariffs. Maybe they're open to some sort of deal. But if that deal won't happen for weeks from now, then I think that the stock market slide and the general malaise that we have about this economy is probably going to stay as well.
We're already seeing some companies adjust how they're doing things right now. Land Rover, Nintendo, what are we hearing here?
Yeah, well, Land Rover and Jaguar say that they're not going to be shipping to the United States with these tariffs in effect. Nintendo, interestingly, they have this brand new console called the Nintendo Switch 2 that was slated to come out later on this spring. They were going to open for pre-orders. They made their announcement of it before the tariffs happened. After the tariffs happened, they said, we are not going to open up pre-orders to the United States for right now. They haven't delayed the release date yet. But, Joe, this just underscores that all of these major companies, these recognizable name brands, are in some cases not even going to be able to ship their products to the United States. So we've been talking a lot about potential price increases. Okay, yeah, it might be more expensive for you to buy that product with the 25, 30, 54% tariff on that product. But I think another question is whether or not the product will even be available in the United States, with some companies saying if we have to pay that added cost, then maybe we just won't have that product at all. For those like me who made the mistake of looking at your 401k late Friday or seeing what's happened to your investments, there's a lot of anxiety right now. What is the best advice people are offering right now for folks who are feeling anxious? Yeah, and again, it looks like this week is going to be another pretty volatile week as well. And I think that the idea is that if you had an investment strategy prior to last week, prior to last Wednesday's Rose Garden announcement, don't change your strategy off of a few bad days on the stock market. Yes, it's going to be very unnerving how much you've seen lost in just terms of percentage. But the idea is that if you weren't going to tap that money for 10, 20, 30 years over that type of long time horizon, stocks generally tend to go up. Now, if you are in retirement or getting close to retirement right now, that's where you might want to consult a financial advisor to see if you're really allocated in the right places. Could you move things around to really take advantage of maybe tax loss harvesting? That's something you need to talk to directly with your financial advisor. But the key is to just don't freak out, especially if you're going to hold on to it long term anyway.
Brian Chung, good to have you with us. Thank you, Brian. Well, Americans are bracing for the full impact of sweeping tariffs. Many took to the streets over the weekend to protest the Trump administration. It's a scene that played out all across the country. Organizers said there were more than 1,000 hands-off demonstrations coast to coast showing their opposition to the president. They expressed their dismay and anger over the White House's deportation policies. They also call out efforts by Trump advisor Elon Musk to downsize the federal government. NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor joins us now with more on this. Yamiche, good morning. So let's start where we just left off with tariffs. We know President Trump spent the weekend in Florida before returning to Washington. Clearly, he's digging in despite how things are looking right now with global markets. What is Mr. Trump saying about all this?
Well, President Trump is really doubling down on his economic strategy, and he is also saying that this is going to have long-term good effects for the U.S. economy, saying at one point that he believes that this is going to make the country $1 trillion, though, of course, economists have said that this is really a tax on the American people and that you're going to see prices go up. We've also heard the Fed chair say that this could slow the U.S. economy. But the president talked specifically about tariffs and his strategy, and he made an interesting metaphor. Take a listen.
I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. I spoke to a lot of leaders, European, Asian, from all over the world. They're dying to make a deal. But I said, we're not going to have deficits with your country. We're not going to do that, because to me, a deficit is a loss.
So that was the president aboard Air Force One yesterday. And what he was saying was that sometimes you might have to take medicine. So he was essentially saying that this market situation with the Dow going down and the market plummeting in the way that it has, that this is really in some ways just the country having to do what it has to do to get through this necessary pain. He was questioned specifically on whether or not he did this on purpose, because over the weekend he reposted something that said President Trump is playing chess while the rest of the world is playing checkers. And there was a hint there that he may have done this on purpose, but he's saying, no, he did not do that. He also was questioned about whether or not there was a threshold of pain that would be too much for him to bear. And the president said that was a, quote, stupid question. And in fact, that this is just sort of what people have to do. And then on the other side of this, he believes his economic strategy will be beneficial.
So, Yamisha, are we hearing from anyone inside the Republican Party who is uneasy with how this tariff plan is playing out?
It's a critical question. Right now, we have heard from at least one lawmaker in the House, a Republican who has put up a bill to try to wrestle back some power from President Trump when it comes to tariffs. There's a similar bill in the Senate, though neither one of those bills seem like they're going to see the light of day. And it's hard to see the Republican Party coalesce around a strategy that they would really be trying to take power away from President Trump, because that would be very critical. The thing here to remember, though, is that Republican lawmakers, they're thinking about 2026 and the midterms, since a lot of them are up for re-election. The president, unless he finds a way to run for a third term, which would most likely violate the U.S. Constitution, he is right now seen as a lame duck. So he isn't going to have some of the same political backlash that the Republican Party might face and lawmakers might face. That being said, you're not seeing a big break from Republicans when it comes to the president on this issue right now, Joe.
Let's talk about those protests we saw all across the U.S. over the weekend. Protesters took part in more than 1,200 events organized by Democratic activists. Just walk us through what we saw and what their message was.
Well, we saw protests across the country, but we also saw protests even abroad in places like Paris and other cities. And what we saw were protesters really voicing anger at two people in particular. One, of course, President Trump, saying that his policies have really hurt the American economy, that they've also led to cruel, they think, layoffs and cuts when it comes to different agencies and departments. But there was also a lot of blame and anger pointed at Elon Musk, who, of course, while he's not officially the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, he is someone who is seen as the face of it and is seen as someone who's been pushing for a lot of these draconian cuts that we've seen in places like the Department of Education and Health and Human Services. So protesters were essentially saying that they were coming to the streets because they were angry about the way that things are going. And there was, of course, a lot of backlash when it came to the economy as well, with some people saying that President Trump was really leading our country down the road of a recession. So a lot of a voice there. And it's really interesting because while the president has not been in office for even 100 days, what we've seen is sort of this is the first big mass protest movement. It wasn't like 2016 when he came into office. You saw a lot of protests on the front end. So this was, I think, significant for that, Joe.
All right. Yamish, thank you so much. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington this morning. He'll head to the White House to meet with President Trump about the war in Gaza and to talk tariffs. Now, this will be the second meeting between the two leaders since Mr. Trump entered office for his second term in January. Despite efforts by the Trump administration to try to end the war, the U.S. has expressed support for Israel's renewed offensive in Gaza. It was a deadly weekend in the enclave. Israel's defense minister ordered an expansion of operations on Sunday following rocket fire from Gaza. And this morning, the Palestinian Media Forum says that the IDF killed and injured journalists who were resting in a media tent in Han Yunis. NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from Tel Aviv with the latest. Matt, good morning. So what do we know about Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to the White House today? It does seem like they have a lot to talk about, not just what's happening in Gaza, but also trade policy.
That's right. The trade policy thing is a really interesting wrinkle to that Washington, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv relationship that really had been seen to blossom over the past couple of months ever since Trump took office. I think it's clear from the reports we're reading in the Israeli media that the Israelis were very surprised to see that the Trump administration were slapping 17% tariffs on the Israelis, one of the closest allies of the Americans and one of the closest allies of Donald Trump. So this meeting, and we saw that the premier of Israel arrived last night in Washington and had a meeting that was hastily arranged with Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. Today, he's going to be meeting with Donald Trump in just a few hours. He's going to be pleading with the U.S. president to try to waive most, if not all, of those tariffs. And this is the first time that we've actually seen a world leader going to Washington and appealing to the president in person, hat in hand. And, Joe, I think given the headlines, given the stock market, we can expect to see just this kind of behavior from many foreign leaders over the course of the next several weeks and months.
Matt, let's talk about what's happening in the Middle East. The Palestinian Red Crescent is demanding an investigation into the killing of 15 emergency workers near Rafah last month. That's after video emerged that contradicts the Israeli military's account of what happened. We do want to warn our viewers this video is disturbing, but Matt, walk us through what happened and how the Israeli military is responding.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that you're seeing this in this video, you're seeing marked emergency vehicles showing up late last month to the scene of an incident. They park and they get out, and then, according to this video that was found on the corpse of one of those slain 15 rescue workers, they actually had some level of communication. There was Arabic heard and Hebrew heard, an interchange of words between the soldiers and the emergency workers before the soldiers opened fire. And we heard over the weekend that the Israelis, or late last week, the Israelis said in a rare acknowledgement that they were actually mistaken about their earlier statements about this. They had said previously that, in fact, these emergency vehicles were unmarked. Their lights weren't blinking, which you can clearly see in that video, and that they fired because they were just afraid that these were actually militants. They even went so far as to say that some 9 out of the 15 of those killed were actually recognized militants from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. We've heard various different numbers coming out with no evidence from the Israelis that any of these men were in fact belonging to any listed terrorist organizations. So this is becoming a broadening scandal for the Israeli government, just as Netanyahu lands in Washington, D.C.
And Matt, what more can you tell us about Israel's attack on Han Yunis and what we're learning about the victims there?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a big attack against Han Yunis just yesterday. Dozens killed. There were about 53 people who were killed, according to Palestinian health officials in the Gaza Strip, over just the past 24 hours. Now, one notable example of this was a strike against a tent that housed journalists in the Gaza Strip. We saw a very, very graphic video that showed that tent in flames with at least one person who looked like they were burning themselves. 2 people were killed, 9 people were injured. One of those was a journalist. That means that death is about more than 200 journalists who have been killed, according to Palestinian health officials, since the beginning of the latest round of fighting back in 2023. Joe.
All right. Matt Bradley. Matt, thank you so much. Over the last week, round after round of severe spring weather in the South has killed at least 21 people across 6 states. Several tornadoes were reported throughout the South over the weekend. That includes this one in Mississippi, which tore through homes, leaving destruction in its wake. And several southern states have declared states of emergency, with torrential rains triggering historic flooding there. In Arkansas, heavy wind and rain tore down trees, some slamming into homes. The National Guard was pressed into service. Troops delivered water in the central part of Arkansas after a lightning strike seriously damaged a town's water system. The rain has mostly ended. The danger has not. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa has the latest from hard-hit Kentucky.
America's days-long stretch of deadly spring weather marked by widespread flooding across the Midwest and South, with water still rising.
We've never dealt with anything like this.
Really?
Yeah, no, nothing like this as far as the amount of water we have.
Drone video shows Dawson Springs, Kentucky submerged. Water covering a substation, forcing crews to temporarily cut power. Farmer Austin Chappell using a boat to feed his stranded cows.
The Lord gave us some cattle, it's our duty to take care of them.
States of emergency declared across the South. In Mississippi, a suspected tornado tore through homes, leaving a trail of debris. In Arkansas, drenching rains tore down trees, some slamming into houses. Our George Solis is there.
Some here in Little Rock are dealing with more than just cleanup. This homeowner now recovering in the hospital after being trapped for hours, needing help from more than just firefighters on the scene, but also a doctor.
Researchers say these types of flood emergencies are getting worse amid the climate crisis, with a warming atmosphere capable of holding more water. This week, water levels in some spots are expected to rise for days. Kathy Park is in Memphis.
The floodwaters are ending up right here in the Mississippi River. You can see how high it's running right now, even carrying away large pieces of debris. River flooding continues to be a threat this week.
The deadly weather taking a toll, with fatalities across multiple states, including Kentucky. 9-year-old Gabriel Andrews was swept away by flash floodwaters there, the coroner says, walking to his school bus Friday.
We are deeply saddened at this horrific tragedy that claimed the life of one of our students.
All right, thanks to Maggie Vespa and our team for that report. While the rain is slowing down, the waters in flooded areas will not crest for several days. So what can the Southeast expect next? Let's get your morning news now. Weather. Meteorologist Michelle Grossman is tracking it all for us. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Yeah, we're going to continue to watch those rivers in the Mid-South to the Ohio Valley very closely over the next several days because river flooding takes longer and it lasts longer. So something we're going to watch. A lot of the gauges are at moderate stages at this point, and we're looking at that increasing as we go throughout the next couple of days. Now, we are still unsettled. This is the same front that brought that catastrophic weather the past 5 days, let's say. Today, we are looking at rain falling, but we're not expecting the flooding amounts that we saw. We could see over 3 inches in some spots, but that would be isolated. We do have heavy rain falling, and we do have severe weather. The Southeast will be the bullseye for the severe weather today. And you can notice how long this front is. From the Gulf Coast all the way to portions of New England. On the colder side of this, the northern side of the front, we are looking at snow falling in portions of New England into the Great Lakes, a wintry mix in the interior parts of the Northeast. So this continues to be a problem as we go throughout this Monday. It will finally move off the coast as we go throughout tonight into tomorrow. Severe weather threat, the bullseye again in the Southeast from Columbia to Savannah, Tallahassee, Gainesville. We could see winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour with any of these storms. A tornado or two is possible. We've already tracked radar indicated tornadoes this morning, and we're looking at the hail risk. It's low, but it's not zero. So that will be a concern as well, along with that heavy rain. This is what it looks like. That front is finally on the move. It was parked for so many days. That's why we had that catastrophic flooding. It is moving, but it is moving slowly. We'll finally move off the coast later on tonight into tomorrow morning. We're going to see some lingering rain in Florida tomorrow. And also some lingering snow in New England because that's a secondary front that's going to reinforce some cold air there. It's going to bring accumulating snow to portions of New Hampshire, Vermont, into Maine. That will be the story for tomorrow. And then stronger winds ushering colder temperatures. A lot of us in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic will feel that cold air. Rainfall forecast, we're looking at quite a bit in some spots where you see those yellows and oranges and reds. That's where we're looking at the heaviest amounts. And again, some will see isolated amounts over 3 inches. And when it comes to the snow, we're going to see that as well. Now, we are concerned about flash flooding. Flash flooding is quick as opposed to river flooding. Again, that takes longer. Flash flooding is quick, so you need to heed any warnings that you may see throughout the day from Norfolk to Wilmington, Charlotte, Charleston, Brunswick, down to Gainesville, over to Pensacola. Pensacola, you're in a slight risk there. The rest, we're looking at a minor risk with that green shading. Snowfall forecast, we're looking at accumulating snow in northern parts of Maine over 5 inches. April snow there in New Hampshire and also in Vermont. Speaking about these river floodings, we're looking at all these dots. These are rivers where we're looking at the gauges. So we're expecting the worst flooding over the next seven days. Moderate flooding, that is in the red, where you see the purple, that is major flooding. So that is something that we need to watch closely. That is the big story by far throughout the day. In the middle of the country, we are looking at really chilly highs for April, 10 to 15, 20 degrees below what is typical for this time of year. This morning, we have freeze warnings. Tomorrow, we're going to see freeze warnings in spots as well, because temperatures will dip into the 20s and 30s. Daytime highs well below normal for this time of year, into the 40s in Minneapolis, 41. That's 13 degrees below what is typical for this time of year. And Joe, we're looking at 46 degrees in New York City. A chilly day today, and then another chilly day with the winds blowing tomorrow on Tuesday. Back to you.
All right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.